You may be familiar with the phrase skeletons in the closet, but what if I changed that to a skeleton in my freezer? Sadly, in January 2018, this was a harsh reality that the community of Oshawa would be faced with, sending shockwaves throughout the entire city. And as investigators dived into this grisly case, newly discovered DNA would confirm that they had found more than they had bargained for. However, despite finding multiple victims within the House of Horrors, a narcissistic killer would make himself the main protagonist of the show, or so he thought. But who was this twisted and violent man? How did he commit such horrendous actions? And most crucially, who and where were his victims? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at a particularly harrowing case. Now, for all you true crime enthusiasts out there, you may have heard of this case before already, but there have been so many recent developments that it's certainly worth talking about again. By the way, welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, so if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing. And yes, by the way, this is a new camera. Thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon, I really do appreciate it, and I've used this month's earnings to buy myself a new camera and lens. Ever since day one, I've been using an iPhone. Not sure why it took me so long to change, but here we are, and yeah, thank you so much, guys. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Adam Strong. Welcome back to Canada, folks, and more specifically, the thriving city of Oshawa. Found on Lake Ontario and around 60 kilometers east of Toronto, this city has been in existence all the way back since 1842. The town was established when its first post office opened, being named after the native word for the crossing place. Eventually, Oshawa found itself becoming a city in 1924. Manufacturing has always been a core part of Oshawa's economy, with one of the most renowned companies, General Motors, operating in the area since 1876. Nowadays, this vibrant city is filled with a bustling arts and theatre scene, and hosts 3 major film festivals throughout the year. Parks are in abundance here too, with a total of 1,000 acres of natural area to enjoy. Now, Oshawa also boasts one of the oldest hospitals in Canada, that being Lakebridge Health, which was founded in 1910. And to add to its already long list of bragging rights, it also has one of the lowest crime rates and one of the highest employment rates in the entire of Canada. Top things to do here include the Oshawa Shopping Centre, bowling, walking Harmony Valley, and the All or Nothing Brew House. And of course, being Canada, there's plenty of great coffee in the area too. With a place as peaceful as this, it is easy to see why the events of 2017 would cause so much shock and disgust amongst the residents. And one of those living in the area at the time was a young woman named Rori Hache. Born to Shannon Dion and nicknamed Hash Brown by her family, Rori was described as a kind and clever child. Her childhood was described as relatively uneventful, but it is interesting to note that some of her relatives are on the wilder side of life. Born into a biker family, her grandfather, Bernie Guiden, was the founder of Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club, and her uncle was an active member of the Hells Angels too. Safe to say, this is a family you wouldn't want to make enemies with. Throughout her early teenage years, Rori tried very hard at school, and by the age of 13, she'd even won Cadet of the Year in her local squad. However, and it's not known why, but shortly after this, things began to take a turn for the worse, and it's likely that drugs are to blame. Methamphetamine and a long battle with addiction followed, and sadly, she turned to sex work to help fund the habit. Her mother watched on in despair, but despite her best efforts, Rori simply wouldn't help herself. It became so bad that Shannon had to seek external intervention for help. By the time she had turned 17, Rori began to make positive steps forward. She'd found her own apartment, re-enrolled into education, and even found love with a man named Tony. Things were finally looking up for her, which is probably why friends and family were confused when she suddenly disappeared. Because in an instant, Rori had vanished. After experiencing a mental relapse, Rori was taken to the hospital by a friend and her mother. Sadly, the pair couldn't stay with her. They left the waiting room relatively quickly after this, leaving Rori alone in the waiting room. However, she seemed to change her mind shortly after this, and around 15 minutes after sitting down, she got up and walked out of the hospital, a surveillance camera capturing her calmly walking away alone. Whatever she was doing, or wherever she was going, only she knew herself. And tragically, this was the last time Rori Hache would be recorded on camera. As the hours went by, concern began to grow while her silence remained, and as those hours turned into days, others began to seriously worry. The first person to finally alert the police was her guidance counsellor, with her mother doing the same thing not long after. Extensive searches were carried out across the city by friends and family alike, but despite their best efforts, no clues or information were left behind in her absence. Some suggested that perhaps she had run away and didn't want to be found. However, this theory did not make any sense to Shannon. She knew her daughter very well, and knew that something else must have happened. 2 weeks later, and entirely disconnected from the case, a disturbing discovery was just about to be made. The date was September the 11th, 2017, and at around 8:30 p.m, an 11-year-old boy and his grandfather were peacefully fishing on the Oshawa harbour, taking in the sunset and the summer's gentle dusk weather. It was at that moment that the pair saw something floating in the water. At first, they thought it perhaps was a dead animal, but as they took a closer look, their stomachs began to churn. Floating before them was a human female torso, absent of a head or any limbs. And of course, they called the police immediately. As officers searched the water for any other body parts, the news broke out to the Oshawa public. However, frustratingly, as the weeks passed by, no conclusive DNA matches were found, and so the police were left with this mystery of who the victim was. It was kind of obvious that this was no accident. It would have to be pretty severe for this to be one. For months, there were no leads on who this person could be, but all of that would suddenly change on December the 29th, when a very serious phone call came into the police. A young couple living in an upstairs apartment of a house found at 19 Macmillan Drive began to experience some rather unusual problems with their plumbing. To begin with, they were no longer able to drain the bathtub, and a few days later, a very foul smell started to rise from the drain. Understandably concerned, they decided to ask their downstairs neighbour if he was experiencing the same issue, and this neighbour being a very crucial person to today's case, and his name was Adam Jeffrey Strong. Having lived in this apartment for over 14 years, the 45-year-old man was a very perplexing person. Not a vast amount is known about his early life, but he was living alone and seemed to keep to himself. The man was apparently a huge enthusiast for scuba diving and boats, and he had even worked as a security guard on several film sets. Saying that, he had managed to get himself fired from 2 of these jobs, but it's not actually clear or known why. There was nothing particularly appealing about Adam, and it seems like this was something that all women around him knew. His ex-girlfriend allegedly cheated on him, leaving Adam both hurt and angry, and it's reported by the few friends that he had that this was the point in his life where things began to go downhill. One ex-partner of his described him as being extremely controlling and abusive. He would often force himself upon her, and forcefully used restraining devices during sex. He was also into BDSM, not that this is anything noteworthy. Now, Adam had no criminal record and had never been on the police radar before. However, after this phone call, that was all about to change. Adam seemed alarmed when his upstairs neighbour suggested that they call the plumber to fix the drains, and instead asked them if he could try to fix the issue himself. The neighbours were dubious over this recommendation, but eventually they decided to give him some time to try and repair it. However, after a few more days of the ongoing problem and still no resolution, the couple ran out of patience and called a plumber on the 29th of December. After beginning to investigate the issue, this plumber was met with a very strong aroma of decay. No blockage was found in the upstairs apartment though, so Adam was asked for entry. The 45-year-old man appeared to be quite edgy with the idea, and it was noted that he was pacing back and forth in his apartment the entire time, asking multiple questions about what the plumber was doing and asking how long it would take. Now, this was a pretty difficult job, and so the plumber decided to snake the drain using a flexible metal wire. However, after working for around 3 or 4 hours, he began to remove some rather strange material that he'd never experienced in a pipe before, that of course being quite fleshy and meaty. With more than 10 pounds of the stuff coming out of the pipe, he was beginning to grow very concerned. He decided to call his boss for a second opinion, who then told him to call the police immediately.
Communications.
Hi there, how are you?
Good, you?
Good, thanks. I'm a plumber and I'm on site for a job. And we got we're snaking a drain, and we've been pulling back. We probably pulled back about 10 pounds, 15 pounds of it looks like flesh type of stuff, meat. We've been working at it for 3-4 hours now, right?
Oh, okay.
And we can't get it clear, but we keep pulling back chunks of whatever the hell it is.
After receiving the phone call, officers were dispatched to the residence to investigate. Initially, they asked the upstairs couple if they'd been flushing meat down their toilet, which, predictably, they hadn't. And when officers decided to question Adam, the situation took a very sudden turn. It was to their shock that Adam held up his hands and said, "Okay, you've got me. The jig is up. It's a body, and if you want the rest of her, she's in my freezer. And she's pretty defleshed." The confession hit officers like a ton of bricks. They entered the apartment to investigate further, only to be greeted by a very horrendous scene. The basement apartment was quite literally awful. Possessions were scattered everywhere, covered in dirt and grease. The floor was covered with so much filth that narrow walkways had formed to allow passage through the residence. And worst of all was the overpowering smell of decay. The toilet in the bathroom had been removed, where Adam had desperately tried to relieve the blockage without any success. And found in the bedroom was the most gruesome discovery of them all. After locating a freezer, it was opened to reveal the partially skeletonized remains of a young woman, with her head found inside a plastic bag. Found on the neck was the tattoo of the word alive. Tragically, the same tattoo that Rori Hache had. DNA tests were performed on the remains, and, as you can likely imagine, were confirmed to belong to that of the missing teenager. Devastatingly, at the time of her murder, Rori had actually been pregnant, meaning that 2 lives had cruelly been taken from the world. Further evidence of Rori's demise could be found in the rest of the apartment. Her blood was found on the skirting boards, walls and ceiling, and her running shoes were found in a plastic bag on the floor, also covered in her blood. During the search, police also discovered various sex toys, a wide variety of knives, and, terrifyingly, an explosive device too, which would later turn out to be a crudely built pipe bomb. Now, no one has any idea why he had this, but potentially, the phone call made to the police could have actually prevented an entire massacre. Bomb squads were called to deal with the device, which was later detonated before anyone was injured. News reports even capturing the moment it was detonated. When the investigation continued, a bent hammer containing Rori's DNA was also found. And it's very likely that, tragically, this was the murder weapon. Adam was arrested that very day, but without any firm evidence of him actually committing the murder, he was only charged with interference of a dead body. This did, however, allow investigators to bring him in for interrogation, but sadly, he wouldn't give much away. Although he was interviewed for around an hour, it was with very limited success. He remained coy with any details, and even refused to engage with the officers beyond more than just basic questions. However, thankfully, this wouldn't be the only time he was interviewed. We will get to that later. Now, without a court order, investigators could not interview him any further, but thankfully, during his bail hearing, he was told he would be held in custody until his trial. Despite only being charged with interference of a dead body, the investigators knew that he was definitely guilty of far more. They just didn't know what of. But around 7 months after Adam's initial arrest, a huge development came within the case, and it all centered around a major discovery at the crime scene. Within one of the kitchen drawers, a Wyoming hunting knife was found. The knife itself was not really a surprise, but what was found on the knife would blow the investigation wide open. Found on the blade of the knife was the DNA of another female human, and this one did not come from Rori Hache. And after running it through analysis, it matched up to a woman named Kandis Fitzpatrick. Now, Kandis was another Ottawa citizen, and sadly, she had already been reported as missing since March 2008. Similarly to Rori, she was 19 years old at the time of her disappearance, and unbelievably, had not been seen or heard from her family in over 10 years. Kandis was also a troubled teen. described by her father Bill as being on and off the streets, struggling with drug addiction, and also turning to sex work. She too would often leave home for weeks at a time with little to no warning. And with both women bearing a strikingly similar history and physical appearance, the uncanny parallels were enough to send chills through the investigators. Now, given Kandis's flighty lifestyle, those around her were not overly concerned whenever she disappeared for a short while. So, when she suddenly vanished after walking on a journey to a nearby mall, initial worries were not that high. However, as hours of silence turned into weeks and then eventually months, her father began to grow increasingly worried for her safety. Seriously though, months? I have no idea why it took so long, but her disappearance wasn't reported until 2010. This meant that most of the efforts to locate her safely were already pitifully small. Her father spent years searching for her, but sadly all hopes were dismissed despite his best efforts. And tragically, 10 years later, the worst of his fears would be confirmed in Adam's apartment. 11 months after his arrest, Adam Strong was once again brought back in for questioning. Now, investigators knew that they had to be extremely careful with how they spoke to him, as the interrogation had to be admissible in court to be used by the prosecution. The detective began by making sure that all of Adam's needs were met during the 12-hour interview, which included cigarette breaks and even his favourite food. And let me tell you, some of the things he said in this interview were absolutely infuriating. Just a quick side note, but I am absolutely amazed at how much this guy ordered. I mean, I know I don't eat that much, but holy shit did this guy have a stomach. I suppose 2,800 calories isn't that much if it's your last civilian meal. And I have to say, good choice on the spicy chicken wraps too. But the way that Adam spoke about his victims really hit me, if I'm honest. He spoke about them as if they were worthless objects and not even human.
Never worried. You really?
Yeah, you know why?
Yeah, I'm wondering why.
I'll tell you why. Because to tell somebody not to go in your freezer
We'll make them go in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The detective on duty was simply great at building trust and rapport with Adam, allowing him the chance to spill all his secrets and dark truths. He openly confessed to dismembering and disposing of Rori, removing her limbs and dumping her torso in the lake, before cutting up the rest of her body and attempting to flush her piece by piece down the toilet.
Okay, how much of her body did you guys get back? Obviously the entire skeletal structure, right?
Well, we obviously whatever was in the house.
Yes,
we
in the
got.
freezer.
Yes.
And how much of it were you able to pull out of the pipes?
Quite a bit. It was bad luck.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. They're like, you're stupid. I'm like, you kidding me?
Well,
That's an awesome way.
yeah.
I just got greedy, that's all.
So the 24th is when you start this. You said Christmas Eve.
Yes.
Are you doing this while it's frozen or partially defrosted?
Completely defrosted.
Okay. Now that would take several hours, wouldn't it?
No, not bathtub full of hot water.
Oh, okay. Like within a couple hours.
I wouldn't wager. I had to fill the bathtub up a few times at that
To
time.
keep the water hot.
Yes.
Gotcha.
I don't know if I should really be talking about that, but ultimately you do have me on the... There's no getting around that.
Yep.
His attitude throughout the entire interview is quite simply awful. He seemed to have no care about what he had done, or how he could have affected so many other lives with his actions. Adam himself claimed to have all the traits of a serial killer, including a taste for killing animals. He also stated that the only reason he was caught was due to inadequate plumbing, which, quote, was a freaking shame for me. And when questioned about the DNA of Kandis Fitzpatrick, he didn't deny the mutilation of her body either. He would then further say that it was his own procrastination in not boiling the knife that led to it being discovered. Adam showed absolutely no remorse, no empathy, and no fear of being in prison. And to add to all of this, no matter what the detective tried, he was never able to get Adam to admit to the actual killing of either Rori or Kandis. Adam would even have the barefaced audacity to ask the detective to, quote, pass his condolences on to the family. Moving to the legal proceedings of this case, Adam Strong was charged with first-degree murder of Kandis Fitzpatrick and Rori Hache, despite Kandis's body at the time not being found. Now, in Canada, first-degree murder is qualified through premeditation or in commission of another crime, such as robbery or sexual assault. Adam's case was deemed to involve the latter, as his DNA was sadly found inside Rori's body, and there were serious signs of genital mutilation too. This meant that eligibility of first-degree murder was essentially a slam dunk for Adam Strong, and in December of 2008, his trial finally began.
I'm Pam Seidel outside the Oshawa courthouse. Gruesome details emerged here this morning on this, the first day of the first-degree murder trial of Adam Strong. The Oshawa man is charged with killing 2 teenagers nearly a decade apart. The family and friends of one of the victims, Rori Hache, could only sit and listen in horror as the Crown described how the body parts of the young woman were found in garbage bags inside the home of the accused.
During his trial, the prosecution put their own version of events with regards to Rori Hache. It is theorized that Adam lured the vulnerable teenager to his apartment on the understanding of exchanging sexual services for money. Once in his apartment, Adam restrained Rori using a BDSM-style contraption, before savagely beating her with the hammer found in his home. Although her body was discovered with multiple bruises to her face and head, Adam denied that this was the cause of her death. Prosecutors then claimed that Adam dismembered the young woman and then dumped her torso in the Oshawa Lake. This theory was backed up by his cell phone data, which pinged near the lake on September 4th, 2021, around 1 week before the torso was discovered. He then waited several months before chopping up her body and discarding it down the toilet, showing absolutely no remorse or sorrow for what he had done. The defense argued that there was no solid proof of Adam being Rori's killer, and that maybe she had simply died of a drug overdose. They claimed that Adam then panicked and disposed of the body in the manner he had confessed to. While all of this was going on, Adam spent his time in court chuckling and even laughing, and on some days didn't even bother to attend. I honestly have no words for this guy. The jury did not believe his fabricated lies and saw Adam for the man that he truly was, a cold-blooded and remorseless killer. And on March 16th, 2021, Adam Strong was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Rori Hache. Sadly, he was not found guilty of the murder of Kandis Fitzpatrick due to there being no body, but he would later be found guilty of manslaughter instead. Several impact statements were read out by the family members of both Rori and Kandis. Oksana Fitzpatrick, who is Kandis's sister, said, "You took away so many experiences from her. You took away her young life." Bill Fitzpatrick tearfully said, "After all the years of searching, this was not the outcome I expected. I was shattered by the news. Kandis will never get to know her nephews and nieces. Kandis will never get the chance to be a mum." Unfortunately, due to contracting COVID, Shannon Dion was unable to be at the courtroom during sentencing. But in a statement read out by the court, she described Rori as being a far from misplaced child, and one that meant everything to her. She had no idea what life was going to be like from that point forward, and nothing would ever be the same again. She believed from the very beginning that Rori's killer was a seasoned one, as her daughter was tough and, quote, wouldn't have been an easy catch for anyone to handle. She concluded with, "I will never see Rori fall in love, graduate school, be married, or have children." On April 21st, 2021, Adam Strong was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 25 years for the murder of Rori. He would also receive 18 years for the manslaughter of Kandis, to be served concurrently, a maximum sentence that can possibly be given under Canadian law. This means that Adam will be behind bars for a bare minimum of 43 years, with life as a maximum. The judge concluded the sentencing hearing by commenting how Adam showed no realistic signs of rehabilitation, given his behaviour both in the interview and in the courtroom. The terrible man is now serving his time at the Joyceville Correctional Centre.
It does not change the fact that our girls are not coming home, but today we let them rest. Today this monster's off our street, and he's no longer a part of our day. He's no longer a part of our lives. I think the judge did an incredible job of bringing this man to his knees.
As soon as the judge started talking, I turned to my daughter Oksana and I said, you can hear it in his voice, he's not happy, he's mad. So I knew he was going to come up with a good sentence. The way he addressed Adam, he let Adam know in no uncertain terms what he did was wrong, and he's being punished for it.
Now, while this may seem like the end of our case today, there is one final twist to the story. Sometime during February 2022, Adam made the strange decision to confess new information to a jail guard. And if you haven't guessed what that was, It was the location of Kandis Fitzpatrick's body. Police responded immediately by authorizing Adam to be taken to the gravesite so he could show them exactly where she was hidden. It was then in the area of Secreto Drive and Britannia Avenue East, and after 14 years of being missing, that the remains of Kandis were finally found. After 14 years of questions, Bill Fitzpatrick and his family could now finally begin to have some closure. To this very day, Kandis's cause of death is still unknown, and the investigation is still ongoing with Adam Strong, with new evidence being discovered in his apartment. Not much more has been released to the public so far, but it does suggest that Rori and Kandis may not be the last of Adam's victims. Rori Hache and Kandis Fitzpatrick were two teenagers who were trying to find their place in the world. Facing difficult struggles, both of them were trying their best to turn their life around. Both girls had loving families who thought extremely highly of them and wanted nothing but the very best for their daughters. And despite neither girl having ever met each other, they will forever be linked by their tragic and untimely passing, all at the hands of a sadistic and remorseless monster. With Rory's family attached to not one but two motorcycle gangs, it is very likely that Adam will forever be looking over his shoulder in prison. And to be honest, I don't blame them if they seek revenge either. So anyway folks, I think I'm going to wrap this one up here. Thank you so much for being here for another video by Coffeehouse Crime. So what do you think about this case? Do you think that Rori and Kandis were Adam's only two victims? Or do you think there are more out there? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section down below, as honestly I'm really interested to hear what you think. Anyway, it's time for me to wrap up here, so once again thank you so much for watching today folks, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, it really does help me out. If you'd like to support me and my channel, get early access to my videos, get additional videos for free, and much more, then please check out my Patreon, I really do appreciate it. And if you'd like extra information on my cases, or simply to follow my adventures, please consider following my social media. Anyway folks, that is me done for today, but I'll be back again very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.